The wind in the Texas Panhandle in the year 1874 did not merely blow, it scoured. It carried the grit of the plains, a relentless, dry assault that found its way into the seams of boots, the folds of dresses, and the creases of tired eyelids. It was a wind that tasted of iron and ancient dust, stripping the mercy right out of the landscape before it ever reached the town. Eliza Mercer stood on the boardwalk outside the newly framed train depot, shifting the weight of her son. Noah, from her left hip to her right. The boy was 7 months old, or perhaps Eliza was simply growing weaker. Her arms trembled with a fatigue that went deeper than muscle, settling into the marrow of her bones. Noah whimpered, a dry, scratching sound against her shoulder. He was hungry again. He was always hungry lately, and her own body had little left to give him. She adjusted the thin woolen shawl around the baby's head to shield him from the biting grit. The town of Granite Creek was rising from the dirt like a bruised knuckle, raw and unformed. It was a place of rough lumber and canvas tents, smelling of wet pine, horse manure, and the coal smoke of the locomotive that had just hissed its way eastward, leaving her behind. Eliza checked her pocket for the third time in 10 minutes. Her fingers brushed the cold, hard edge of a silver dollar. It was chipped on one side, a flaw that had made a shopkeeper in St. Louis sneer at it. But to Eliza, it was the only solid thing left in her world. $1.40. That was the sum total of her life savings. It had to last until she could collect what was owed to her. She stepped off the boardwalk into the street, her boots sinking into the rutted earth. The mud had dried into ridges that twisted ankles, but she walked with the careful, deliberate gait of a woman who could not afford to fall. She was 26 years old, though the mirror in the station lavatory had shown her a woman of 40. Her dark hair was pulled back severely, hidden beneath a bonnet that had seen better seasons, and her dress, once a respectable calico blue, was faded to the color of the dust that coated it. Her destination was the boarding house and laundry at the far end of the main street, a sprawling 2-story structure run by a man named Elias Thorne. Thorne owed her 3 weeks of wages for scrubbing sheets until her knuckles bled and cooking stews that were mostly water and potato skins. She had left 2 weeks ago to take Noah to a doctor in the next county when the fever took him, a journey that had cost her nearly everything. Now, she was back to claim her due. The town ignored her. In Granite Creek, a woman without a man was invisible, and a woman with a crying baby was a nuisance. Men in duster coats walked past her, their spurs chiming like discordant bells. A group of railroad workers shouted near the saloon, their laughter sharp and jagged. Eliza kept her head down. She was a widow, according to the papers she carried in her satchel. The truth was colder. Her husband had not died. He had simply ceased to be a husband, riding out one morning 6 months ago to find work, and never sending a letter back. Abandonment was a slower kind of death, one that left the grieving wife with all the burden and none of the pity. She reached Thorne's establishment. The sign above the door creaked in the wind. Thorne's Rest Laundry. She pushed the door open, the bell overhead announcing her presence with a cheerful tinkle that felt like a mockery. Elias Thorne was behind the counter, a man with a face like a slab of cured ham, pink and sweating despite the chill in the wind. He looked up, his small eyes narrowing as they landed on Eliza and the bundle in her arms. "Mr. Thorne," Eliza said. Her voice was steady, though her knees shook. "I have returned." Thorne did not smile. He wiped his hands on a rag that was grayer than the floor. "I see that, Mrs. Mercer, though I cannot say I expected to." "I came for my wages," Eliza said. 3 weeks of work, $12. Thorne laughed, a wet, wheezing sound. He tossed the rag onto the counter. "Wages, you abandoned your post. Woman, walked out in the middle of a shift. Left the sheet soaking and the fire cold." "My son was sick," Eliza said, hugging Noah tighter as he stirred. "I told your wife. I left a note." "My wife does not run the books," Thorne said, his voice hardening. "I do, and the way I figure it. You cost me more in lost business than any scrubbing was worth. You have no wages here." Eliza felt the blood drain from her face. "That is not true. I worked every hour. I earned that money." "You earned a roof over your head and scraps from the pot," Thorne sneered. He leaned over the counter, his breath smelling of stale tobacco and onions. "And you left it? Now, get out. I have paying guests coming, and I do not want a squalling brat disturbing the peace." "I have nowhere to go," Eliza whispered, the desperation cracking her composure. "Please, just give me $6. "I will give you the toe of my boot if you do not clear the door in 5 seconds, Thorne said. Eliza stood there for a heartbeat, the injustice of it burning in her throat like acid. She wanted to scream. She wanted to grab the heavy iron ledger on the counter and strike him with it. But she looked down at Noah. He was sleeping now, his pale eyelashes fluttering against his cheek. If she caused a scene, if the sheriff was called, they would look at a hysterical woman and a quiet man of property. She knew who would lose. She turned and walked out. The wind outside felt colder now. It cut through her thin dress, chilling the sweat of fear that had broken out on her back. She stood on the street corner, the noise of the town washing over her. $12. It might as well have been 12,000. Without it, she had enough for perhaps 2 nights in a cheap room and milk for the baby. After that, the void. She began to walk aimlessly, moving toward the edge of town where the buildings thinned out and the prairie tried to reclaim the land. She needed to sit. She needed to think. But there were no benches for women like her. Near the creek that gave the town its name, the structures changed. The hurriedly built false fronts of the main street gave way to more practical, sturdy buildings. A large corral fenced with solid oak posts dominated the area, filled with horses that looked better fed than half the people in town. Next to it stood a low, sprawling building made of timber and stone, smoke curling invitingly from its chimney. It was a trading post and livery, larger and better kept than the one near the station. Eliza had heard of this place. The women in the laundry had whispered about it with a mixture of fear and scandalized titillation. The Indians' place. They said the owner was a Comanche buck who had somehow tricked the government into letting him keep the land. They said he was savage, that he kept scalps under the floorboards, that honest folk didn't trade there. Eliza looked at the sign hanging above the double doors. It was not a hastily painted board like Thorne's. It was a heavy piece of leather, stretched and cured, branded with a skilled hand. T.W. Livery Dry Goods. She hesitated. The wind pushed at her back, urging her forward. She was tired. There was a water trough near the corral, and a bench beneath the overhang of the porch. It was out of the wind. Eliza approached cautiously. The smell of hay and clean leather reached her, a comforting, earthy scent. She sat on the rough-hewn bench, exhaling a long, shuddering breath. Noah fussed, and she rocked him gently, humming a tune that had no name. "That is a fine animal, but he has a stone in the left shoe." The voice was deep, resonant, and spoke English with a precision that startled her. It did not have the drawl of the Texans or the sharp clip of the railroad men. It was measured, rhythmic. Eliza looked up. Standing by the corral gate were 2 men. One was a white man, a drover by the look of his dusty chaps and sunburned neck. The other man was tall, with broad shoulders that filled out a simple flannel shirt and canvas vest. His hair was black as a raven's wing, parted neatly and tied back with a leather thong, falling past his shoulders. His skin was the color of bronze in the late afternoon light. It was him, the owner. "I checked him this morning," the driver insisted, his tone aggressive. "Horse is fine. I just want to sell him and move on. Are you buying or not?" "Chief." The tall man did not flinch at the slur. He moved with a fluid grace that made the drover look clumsy. He approached the horse, a sorrel gelding that was tossing its head. He ran a hand down the animal's flank, his touch firm but soothing. The horse settled instantly, with a quick motion. The man lifted the horse's left hoof. "Look," he said calmly. He picked something out with a small knife and held it up. A jagged piece of shale. He tossed it aside and lowered the hoof. "He is sound otherwise," the man said. "But you rode him hard on bad ground. He needs rest and a poultice for the bruise. I will not pay you $40 for a lame horse." "35 then," the driver haggled, crossing his arms. "25. The Comanche man said, "That is the fair price for a gelding that cannot work for a week, and I will pay you in cash, now. Or you can take him to the auctioneer at the railhead. Pay the entry fee. Wait 2 days, and maybe get 30 if you are lucky." The drover spat into the dust, looking sour. He glared at the man, trying to find an angle to bully him, but the Comanche stood relaxed, his hands resting on his hips near the knife at his belt. He was not threatening, but he was undeniably solid. He looked like part of the landscape, as if he had roots going down into the bedrock that the drover could not comprehend. "Fine," the drover grunted. 25. Give me the money." The Comanche man nodded. He reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a small leather pouch. He counted out the coins into the drover's palm. Eliza watched from the shadows of the porch. She saw gold eagles and silver dollars. Real money. He did not deceive the man, nor did he cringe before him. 25. The man said, "Do you want a receipt?" "Just give me the money," the drover muttered. Shoving the coins into his pocket, he turned to leave, then paused, looking back with a sneer. "You speak good English for a savage." The Comanche man's expression did not change. His eyes, dark and unreadable, held the drover's gaze until the white man looked away, uncomfortable. "I speak the language of the contract," he said simply. "Good day to you." The drover stomped off toward the saloon. The Comanche man took the reins of the sorrel gelding and led it toward the barn. As he turned, his eyes swept over the porch. Eliza froze. She felt exposed, an intruder in a place where she had no business. She expected him to shout, to chase her away as Thorne had done. She was a white woman sitting on his bench, watching his business, in this town. That was enough to start a rumor. He stopped. He looked at her, and then his gaze dropped to the bundle in her arms. Noah had managed to free one small hand from the shawl and was waving it in the air. The man did not smile, but the hardness around his eyes softened by a fraction. He did not approach her. He did not ask her what she wanted. He simply nodded, a curt, respectful dipping of his chin, acknowledging her presence without demanding an explanation. Then he turned and led the horse into the warmth of the barn. Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She had been told he was a monster. She had been told he was a thief who stole land from white men, but she had just watched him pay a fair price to a man who despised him. She had watched him treat a horse with more gentleness than Elias Thorne had treated a desperate mother. She looked down at her hand. Her thumb rubbed against the sharp, jagged edge of her silver dollar. It was damaged, worth less in the eyes of the world. Just like her. She looked at the sign again, the heavy leather swinging slightly in the wind. It bore a brand burnt deep into the hide Tawai, beside the name. There was a symbol she did not recognize, a circle with a line cutting through it, like a horizon. It was a mark of ownership, a mark that said, "I am here. I belong here." Eliza pulled her shawl tighter. The sun was setting, painting the sky in violent shades of purple and bruised black. The temperature was dropping. She had to find a room. She had to spend a portion of her chipped dollar, but for a moment, she didn't move. She sat on the bench of the Comanche's trading post, listening to the wind howl against the sturdy timber walls, and felt a strange, terrifying kinship with the man inside. The world wanted to erase them both. It wanted to blow them away like the dust on the road. Eliza Mercer stood up, her legs aching. She tucked the silver dollar deep into her pocket. It was all she had. But as she walked back toward the lights of the unforgiving town, she realized it wasn't the coin that kept her upright. It was the weight of the child in her arms, and the sudden, fierce refusal to be blown away. "We will not vanish. Noah," she whispered into the wind. "We will not." The train whistle blew in the distance, a lonely, mournful sound that echoed across the vast emptiness of the plains. Night had come to the Panhandle, and Eliza walked into it, alone. The darkness in Granite Creek was not merely the absence of light. It was a physical weight, heavy with the scent of coal smoke and the impending frost. Eliza Mercer sat on a crate near the stagecoach depot. The wood damp and splintered beneath her skirts. The wind had died down, replaced by a stillness that was somehow worse, for it allowed the cold to settle into the earth and into her flesh. Noah was awake. He had stopped crying an hour ago, retreating into a lethargy that terrified Eliza more than his screams. His small face was pale, his lips dry and tinged with blue. He needed milk. He needed warmth. And the silver dollar, the one with the chipped edge that she had rubbed like a talisman, was gone. It had happened in a blur of motion that she still could not fully comprehend. She had been standing near the ticket window, inquiring about the cost of a seat on the morning stage to the east. Just to know, just to have a number to aim for. The platform was crowded with men unloading crates, the air thick with dust and shouting. A man had stumbled into her, a rough-looking fellow in a torn coat, apologizing profusely, his hands brushing against her apron as he steadied himself. By the time she had righted herself and checked her pocket, the weight was gone. She had screamed. She had pleaded with the station master, but the man had vanished into the shadows of the rail yard, and the station master had only shrugged. "Folks lose things, ma'am. Best keep a tighter hold next time." Now, she was truly hollow. The emptiness in her pocket mirrored the emptiness in her stomach. A shadow fell over her. Eliza looked up, squinting against the gloom. A man stood there, dressed in a suit that had once been fine but was now shiny at the elbows. He wore a bowler hat and a smile that did not quite reach his eyes. "You look like a woman in need of a situation," the man said. His voice was smooth, like oil pouring over gravel. Eliza pulled Noah closer. "I have no money, sir. If you are selling something, I cannot buy it. I am not selling. My dear, I am placing," the man said, tipping his hat. "I am a labor broker, Mr. Silas Vane. I see a woman with strong hands and a desperate look. The new boarding house on the North Ridge needs a cook. Night shift, room and board included." Eliza's heart gave a painful lurch of hope. "Room and board. Indeed, a warm bed for the little one," Vane said, gesturing vaguely toward the dark outline of the hills. "But, naturally, there is the matter of the uniform and the agency fee. Standard practice, $2 up front." Eliza let out a sharp breath, the hope withering instantly. I was robbed. Just moments ago. I have nothing." Vane's face hardened instantly. The oily charm evaporated, leaving behind a cold, predatory assessment. He looked at her tattered shawl, her worn boots, and the sleeping infant. "Nothing a pity. The job goes to those who can invest in their future." "Please," Eliza whispered, standing up, her legs trembling. "I will work for free the first week. I will scrub floors. Just a place for my son to sleep." Vane stepped closer, and, for a moment, Eliza thought he might strike her. Instead, he reached out and fingered the edge of her shawl. "Wool," he muttered. "Moth-eaten." He dropped it with a sneer. "I run a business. Mrs. Mercer, not a charity ward. Without the fee, there is no introduction." He turned on his heel and walked away, disappearing into the fog that was beginning to roll off the creek. Eliza took a step after him, then stopped. It was a trap. She realized it now. Even if she had the money, there was likely no job. He would have taken her $2 and left her standing in the mud. But the realization brought no comfort. She was alone. The town was shutting its doors against the night. The saloon piano tinkled in the distance, a mocking, cheerful sound. Noah stirred and let out a weak, hacking cough. The sound tore through Eliza's composure. She could starve. She could freeze. But she could not watch him fade. She began to walk. She did not know where she was going, only that she had to keep moving to generate heat. She passed the shuttered windows of the general store, the dark facade of the bank, and then the smell hit her. It was the smell of animals, warm, living heat, hay and manure and the sweet, heavy scent of milk. She had walked back toward the edge of town, toward the structure she had seen earlier, the Comanche's trading post. The large barn doors were closed. but a smaller side door was slightly ajar, a lantern flickering somewhere deep inside. Eliza stopped. This was madness. This was theft. This was trespassing on the property of a man the whole town whispered was a savage. But then Noah whimpered, a sound so faint it was almost swallowed by the wind. Eliza pushed the fear down into the pit of her stomach. She slipped through the side door. The interior of the barn was vast and surprisingly warm. The air was thick with the smell of alfalfa and horses. High in the rafters, shadows danced as the lantern light from the far end of the stable flickered. She heard the soft nickering of horses, the shifting of hooves on straw. She moved silently, her eyes scanning the stalls. Near the front, away from the main horse stalls, there was a small pen. A goat stood there, chewing cud, its rectangular pupils catching the dim light. Beside the pen, on a wooden stool, sat a half-full pail of milk, likely left from the evening milking and forgotten or set aside for the cats. Eliza's mouth watered. She approached the pail, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. She had no cup. She would have to dip her fingers in, or find a ladle. She set Noah down in a pile of clean hay, wrapping him tightly. He was so quiet, too quiet. She reached for the pail. "Well now, what do we have here?" The voice was not the deep, resonant baritone of the Comanche owner. It was high, scratchy, and filled with a triumphant malice. Eliza spun around, knocking the pail. Milk sloshed over the rim, soaking into the dirt floor. Standing in the shadows of a stall was a man wearing a tin star on his coat, Sheriff Caldwell, and beside him, holding a lantern that illuminated his red, sweating face, was Elias Thorne, the innkeeper who had turned her away hours ago. "I knew it," Thorne crowed, stepping forward. "I told you. Sheriff, she's a vagrant and a thief, skulking around honest men's property." "Please," Eliza gasped, backing away until her legs hit the goat pen. "I wasn't. I just needed—" "Stealing," Sheriff Caldwell said, hooking his thumbs into his gun belt. He was a thick-set man with a mustache that hid his mouth, but not the cruelty in his jaw. "That is the word you are looking for. Little lady, breaking and entering. Theft of livestock products." "It is a cup of milk," Eliza cried, her voice cracking. "My baby is starving. Look at him." She pointed to the bundle in the hay. Noah began to cry then, a thin, wailing sound that echoed in the high ceiling. Caldwell looked at the baby, but there was no pity in his eyes, only a cold calculation. "Child endangerment," he added, nodding to Thorne. "Dragging an infant out in freezing temperatures to commit crimes, that is a serious offense in this territory." Thorne stepped closer, his shadow falling over Eliza. "You remember what I said, Mrs. Mercer? I said you were trouble. Now you have proved it." "Grab her," Caldwell ordered. Thorne lunged. Eliza tried to dodge, but she was weak from hunger and exhaustion. Thorne's hand clamped around her upper arm, his fingers digging into her flesh through the thin fabric of her dress. "No!" she screamed, twisting in his grip. "Let me go." "You are going to the jailhouse," Caldwell said, pulling a pair of iron cuffs from his belt. "And the boy? Well, the boy cannot go to a cell. The widow Parsons has been looking for a child to foster. A nice, wealthy family. Better off than with a thief of a mother." The horror of it struck Eliza harder than any physical blow. It was a trap. They hadn't just stumbled upon her. They had been watching, waiting for her to break, waiting for an excuse to take Noah. A healthy white male baby was a commodity in a town like this. "You cannot take him," Eliza shrieked, clawing at Thorne's face. "He is my son." Thorne grunted as her nails raked his cheek, but he didn't let go. He shoved her hard against the wooden post of the stall. "Hold still, you witch!" "That is enough." The voice cut through the chaos like a knife through canvas. It was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the sheriff freeze and Thorne loosen his grip. Eliza looked toward the back of the barn. Emerging from the darkness, leading the sorrel gelding she had seen earlier, was the Comanche owner, Tawai. He did not look like he was hurrying. He walked with a deliberate, silent stride, his boots making no sound on the packed earth. He wore a heavy buffalo hide coat now, open at the front, revealing the flannel shirt underneath. In his hand, he held a piece of paper. "This does not concern you, Chief," Sheriff Caldwell said, though his voice lost some of its bluster. "We caught a thief on your property, doing you a favor." Tawai stopped 10 feet from them. He looked at Thorne, then at the sheriff, and finally at Eliza, who was trembling against the post, tears streaming down her face. "She is on my property," Tawai said. His English was stiff, the consonants hard, but perfectly intelligible. "That is true. She was stealing your milk," Thorne said, wiping the scratch on his cheek. "Caught her red-handed. And because she stole from me," Tawai continued, ignoring Thorne. "The crime is against me, not against the town, not against the innkeeper. It is a matter of law," Caldwell spat. "Theft is theft." Tawai raised the paper in his hand. "This is the deed to this land, the livery, the barn, the corral, and the stream for 50 yards. It is stamped by the district judge in Austin. It says that on this land, I determine the disposition of goods." He took a step closer. He was taller than the sheriff, taller than Thorne. The lantern light caught the sharp angles of his cheekbones and the dark, unyielding depth of his eyes. "I did not file a complaint," Tawai said. "If I do not complain, there is no crime. Now look here." Caldwell stepped forward, his hand drifting toward his pistol. "You might have a piece of paper, boy, but I am the law in Granite Creek, and I say she is a vagrant, and that baby is a ward of the state." Tawai's gaze shifted to Noah, who was still wailing in the hay. He looked at the child for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he looked back at the sheriff. "You are trespassing," Tawai said. The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. Caldwell's face turned a deep, mottling purple. "You are making a mistake," Caldwell hissed. "Protecting a white thief. It will not look good for you. Tawai, people talk." "Let them talk," Tawai replied. "But do it outside my barn. Get out." Caldwell glared at him, his fingers twitching near his gun. But he knew the stories. He knew that before this man was a business owner, he had been a warrior. And he knew that the deed was legal, backed by money from the East that even the sheriff couldn't easily ignore. "Fine," Caldwell spat. He looked at Eliza with a sneer. "You are lucky, girl. But you cannot stay here forever. As soon as you step 1 foot on the public street, you are mine." He turned and marched out, his spurs jingling angrily. Thorne lingered for a second, giving Eliza a look of pure venom, before scurrying after the lawman. The barn door slammed shut, leaving them in the dim quiet. Eliza sagged against the post, her knees finally giving way. She slid down into the straw, her breath coming in ragged sobs. She reached for Noah, pulling him into her lap, rocking him frantically. "It's all right. It's all right. Mama is here." She was safe from the sheriff, but now she was alone with the man the town called a savage. She looked up at him, fear tightening her chest again. He had saved her. Yes, but why? What was the price? Tawai did not move toward her. He stood where he was, watching her. He did not look angry. He did not look lustful. He looked tired. "The milk," he said, pointing to the spilled pail. "It is gone." Eliza flinched. I will pay you. Someday. I swear." "It was goat milk," Tawai said. He walked past her, moving toward a small room at the back of the barn that served as an office and living quarter. "Goats make more." He disappeared into the room. Eliza stayed frozen, clutching Noah. She didn't know whether to run or stay. If she ran, the sheriff was waiting. If she stayed. A moment later, Tawai returned. He carried a heavy woolen blanket and a clay bowl that steamed in the cold air. He stopped in front of her and crouched down. He was close now, close enough for her to smell the wood smoke on his skin and the scent of sage. He did not try to touch her. He placed the bowl on the straw between them. "Corn mush," he said, "and molasses. It is hot." Eliza stared at the bowl. Her stomach roared. Tawai unfolded the blanket and held it out. "The boy," he said. He nodded at Noah, whose lips were still blue with cold. "The child needs warmth before he needs accusations." Eliza looked into his eyes. They were dark, almost black, but there was a clarity in them that she had not seen in any man in Granite Creek. There was no deception there, no hidden fee. Trembling, she removed the blanket. She wrapped it around Noah, tucking the thick wool around his freezing body. Then she took the spoon from the bowl and brought a small amount of the mush to Noah's lips. He swallowed it greedily, then cried for more. Eliza fed him, her hands shaking. Tawai watched. He did not speak. He simply sat on his heels, his presence a solid, anchoring weight in the shifting uncertainty of her life. When Noah had eaten half the bowl and fallen into a contented, warm sleep, Eliza finally took a bite herself. The sweetness of the molasses and the heat of the corn filled her mouth, and she nearly wept from the relief of it. She looked at Tawai. "Thank you," she whispered. Why did you help me?" Tawai picked up a piece of straw and twisted it between his long fingers. He did not answer the question directly. He looked at the barn door, where the wind was whistling through the cracks. "The sheriff," Tawai said quietly. "He did not want justice. He wanted the boy. I know the look of a man who wants to steal a child." Eliza shivered, pulling the blanket tighter around herself and her son. She was trapped. Outside these walls, the law was waiting to tear her family apart. Inside these walls was a man her society told her to fear, a man who had just fed her when her own people had turned her away. She was caught between the fire and the frost. Tawai stood up. He loomed over her, tall and imposing, yet he stepped back to give her space. "You can sleep in the tack room," he said, gesturing to the small office. "There is a stove. It is warm." Eliza nodded, unable to find the words. She gathered Noah in the bowl, struggling to her feet. As she reached the door of the tack room, Tawai spoke again. "Eat," he said. "Sleep, but in the morning." He turned his head, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "In the morning, you will tell me," he said. "Who pushed you here? Who took your money? I want to know everything." He didn't wait for an answer. He turned and walked toward the horses, disappearing into the shadows of the barn, leaving Eliza with the warmth of the stove and a question that hung in the air like smoke. The morning sun over the Texas Panhandle did not rise gently. It broke the horizon like a yolk spilling over a skillet, hot and demanding. For Eliza Mercer, the light meant that her debt had begun. She stood by the water trough behind the trading post, her arms submerged to the elbows in soapy water. Beside her lay a pile of flannel shirts, canvas trousers, and saddle blankets that smelled of horse sweat and wood smoke. This was the agreement. She was not a guest. She was labor. Tawai had made the terms clear the morning after the incident in the barn. He had stood in the doorway of the tack room, looking at her with that same unreadable expression. "I do not run a charity," he had said. "If you stay, you work, you wash, you cook, you keep the ledger. The goat milk is for the boy. The roof is for work." Eliza had agreed instantly. It was a transaction. She understood transactions. They were safer than kindness. She scrubbed a heavy shirt against the washboard, her knuckles raw. Noah was nearby, seated in a wooden crate padded with hay, gnawing on a piece of dried apple. He was safe. He was fed. That was all that mattered. Yet, as she worked, Eliza felt the weight of her position. She was a white woman living in the dependency of a Comanche man. In Granite Creek, that was not merely scandalous. It was a social death sentence. A wagon rattled up the path to the livery. Eliza stiffened. It was a family of settlers, their wagon loaded with furniture and barrels. The man driving was bearded and grim. The woman beside him wore a bonnet that hid her face. Tawai emerged from the barn. He walked with that fluid, efficient stride that wasted no energy. "Good morning," he said. His voice was level. "Do you need grain or water?" The settler looked down at him, then spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dust near Tawai's boot. Just water. And we are not paying Indian prices. The price is 2 cents a bucket, Tawai said, ignoring the insult near his foot. Same for everyone. The woman in the wagon turned. Her eyes landed on Eliza, who was wringing out a shirt by the trough. The woman's gaze was sharp, filled with a mixture of confusion and disgust. She whispered something to her husband, who turned and glared at Eliza. "You got a white woman slaving for you," the settler sneered. "That is a mighty peculiar arrangement." "She works for wages of trade," Tawai said. "Do you want the water or not?" The settler grunted, tossed a nickel on the ground, and got down to fill his buckets. As the woman waited, she stared at Eliza. It was a look of profound judgment, as if Eliza had shed her skin and revealed something monstrous underneath. Eliza kept her head down, focusing on the rhythm of the scrubbing, but her face burned. When the wagon finally clattered away, Eliza remained frozen. She felt dirty, and it had nothing to do with the laundry water. Tawai walked over. He bent down and picked up the nickel from the dirt, wiping it on his vest. He did not look at her. "Do not let them make you small," he said. "They are angry because the road is long and their wheels are loose. It has nothing to do with you." "It has everything to do with me," Eliza snapped, the humiliation making her bold. "Do you know what they think? They think I am that I have fallen." Tawai turned to her. His dark eyes were hard. "You are alive. You have a son who is fed. Let them think what they want. Their thoughts do not put meat in the pot." He turned and walked back into the darkness of the barn. Eliza watched him go. He was infuriatingly pragmatic. He helped her, yet he built a wall between them so high she could not see over it. He hated pity, she realized, and he hated the idea that anyone might think he was buying her favor. He wanted the world to know this was business, legitimate and cold. Inside the post, Eliza began the second part of her duties, the ledger. The trading post was surprisingly well stocked. There were sacks of flour, tins of coffee, bolts of calico, and boxes of ammunition. The room smelled of spices and cured leather. She sat at the high desk, dipping the pen into the inkwell. Tawai's handwriting in the previous entries was jagged but precise. He accounted for every nail and every horseshoe. "You write well," Eliza said later that evening as they sat near the cast-iron stove. The wind had picked up again, whistling through the chinks in the logs. Tawai was mending a bridle, his large hands working the leather with surprising delicacy. "I learned at the mission school," he said. "And later, when I rode as a scout for the army." Eliza paused, her spoon hovering over the stew she had made. "You were a scout, for the soldiers." "For 3 years," Tawai said. He did not look up. "I thought if I helped them, if I showed them the trails and translated their words, they would leave my family alone. I thought I could trade service for safety." "Did it work?" Eliza asked softly. Tawai stopped working. He stared into the open grate of the stove, the orange light reflecting in his eyes. "No. My wife and daughter were at the winter camp on the Red River. The soldiers I scouted for, they did not care who was friendly and who was not. They just saw Comanche." The silence in the room stretched, heavy and suffocating. Eliza looked at Noah, sleeping soundly in the corner. The thought of losing him was a physical pain in her chest. She could not imagine the hollowness Tawai carried. "I am sorry," she whispered. "Sorry does not change the past," Tawai said, his voice flat. "I learned a lesson. Arrows and rifles can be beaten by more men with more rifles. But paper, the white man fears paper. A deed, a title, a contract. If I own the land, if the judge stamps the paper, I exist. I do not have to ask permission to be here." He looked at her then, and for the first time, Eliza saw the exhaustion behind the stoicism. He was fighting a war, not with weapons, but with the very laws that were designed to crush him. "That is why I keep the ledger," he said. "That is why I pay taxes, so they cannot say I am a savage, so they cannot burn me out without burning their own laws." Eliza felt a shift inside her. She had been afraid of him, afraid of his otherness. But now she saw a mirror of her own desperation. She was a woman trying to survive in a world made for men. He was a Comanche trying to survive in a world made for whites. They were both clinging to the edges of a cliff, fingers bleeding. 2 nights later, the wind turned vicious. It howled down from the north, bringing a sudden, biting frost. The temperature in the tack room plummeted. Eliza woke to the sound of Noah choking. She scrambled out of her blankets, her heart hammering. "Noah!" The baby was thrashing in his makeshift crib. His skin was burning hot, yet he was shivering violently. His breathing was shallow and raspy, a terrifying, wet sound. "No, no, no!" Eliza whispered, panic rising in her throat like bile. She picked him up, wrapping him in her shawl. But he wailed, a high, thin sound of distress. She rushed into the main room of the post. The fire in the stove had burned down to embers. "Tawai!" she screamed. "Help me, something is wrong." Tawai appeared from the back room almost instantly. He was wearing only his trousers and an undershirt, his hair loose around his shoulders. He did not ask questions. He crossed the room in 2 strides and put his hand on Noah's forehead. "Fever," he said, "and the chest is tight." "He is burning up," Eliza sobbed, rocking the baby. "We need a doctor. I have to take him to town. The doctor is drunk by this hour, and the cold air outside will kill the boy before you reach the main street." Tawai said firmly, "Put him by the stove. I will get wood." He moved with a terrifying speed. He stoked the fire until it roared, the heat radiating outward. Then he went to a cabinet on the wall where he kept jars of dried plants. Eliza sat on the floor near the stove, clutching Noah. "Please," she prayed. "Not this. Take anything else, but not him." Tawai returned with a handful of dried bark and some crushed leaves that smelled of sage and mint. He threw a handful of the leaves onto the top of the stove. Immediately, a thick, aromatic smoke filled the room. "Breathe," he commanded Eliza. "Hold him so he breathes the smoke. It opens the lungs." Then he took a small pot, filled it with water from the kettle, and added the bark. "Willow," he said, "for the heat in the blood." Eliza obeyed, holding Noah's face near the rising smoke. The baby coughed, then took a ragged breath. The scent was sharp and clean, clearing Eliza's own head. Tawai knelt beside her. He dipped a clean rag into a bowl of cool water he had brought. "Give me his hand." Eliza hesitated, her instinct to hoard the child fighting against her need for help. "Eliza," Tawai said. He used her name. It sounded strange and intimate on his tongue. "Trust me." She relinquished Noah's small, burning hand. Tawai began to wipe the baby's wrists and forehead with the cool cloth. His hands, so large and capable of breaking horses, were impossibly gentle. He murmured low, rhythmic words in his own language, a song or a prayer. Eliza did not know. For hours, they sat like that. The wind battered the walls, trying to get in, but the fire held it back. Eliza held the baby, and Tawai tended to them. He spooned the bitter willow tea into Noah's mouth drop by drop. He replaced the cool clothes. Sometime before dawn, the fever broke. Noah let out a long sigh, his skin cooling, his breathing settling into a natural rhythm. Eliza slumped against the woodbox, exhaustion washing over her. She looked at Tawai. He was sitting cross-legged next to her, his shoulder brushing hers. He looked tired, lines of fatigue etched around his mouth. "He is sleeping," Tawai said softly. "You saved him?" Eliza whispered. Tears pricked her eyes, not from grief this time, but from relief. "The willow saved him," Tawai corrected. "I just boiled the water." He reached out to check Noah's forehead one last time. His hand brushed against Eliza's cheek. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. For a moment, neither of them moved. The touch was electric, a sudden jolt of awareness that had nothing to do with the crisis and everything to do with the man and woman sitting in the dark. Eliza looked at his lips, then up to his eyes. She saw the question there, and the restraint. He was holding himself back, respecting the boundary he had drawn. She wanted to lean into his hand. She wanted to rest her head on his shoulder and let someone else carry the weight of the world for 5 minutes. Tawai pulled his hand away slowly. He cleared his throat and stood up. "I will check the horses," he said, his voice rougher than usual. keep him warm. He walked out into the cold morning, leaving Eliza alone with the fire and a heart that was beating far too fast. The peace of the morning did not last. 2 days later, a group of men rode up to the trading post. They did not look like customers. They rode expensive horses with silver-studded tack. Leading them was a man who looked like he owned the very air he breathed. Silas Grady. He was a large man, broad in the gut but solid, wearing a coat made of fine wool and a hat that cost more than Eliza had earned in her entire life. He was the cattle baron who controlled the Northern Valley, the man who wanted to turn Granite Creek into his personal shipping yard. Eliza was sweeping the porch when they arrived. She hurried inside, sensing danger, but stayed near the window to listen. Tawai came out to meet them. He stood on the bottom step of the porch, his arms crossed. "Grady," Tawai said, a simple acknowledgement. "Chief," Grady replied with a grin that showed too many teeth. "Fine day. The place is looking. Standing. Surprisingly. Did you come to buy feed, Silas, or just to block my sunlight?" Grady laughed. "Always a wit. No, I came with an offer. Again, $500 for the deed. It is a generous price, more than this pile of timber is worth." "The price is not for sale." Tawai said, "We have had this conversation." "We have," Grady said, leaning forward on his saddle horn. "But see, my herd is coming up from the south next month. 3,000 heads. I need this creek. I need these pens. And frankly, I do not like the idea of my cows drinking water managed by a Comanche. It upsets the investors." "Your cows do not care who owns the water," Tawai said. "And the deed is legal. You can move your herd around the ridge." "That adds 2 days to the drive," Grady snapped, his smile vanishing. "Time is money. Look, be smart. Take the 500. Go back to wherever your people are restricted to these days, before things get complicated." "This is my land," Tawai said. "Get off it." Grady stared at him, his face reddening. Then his eyes drifted to the window. He saw Eliza. She stepped back, but it was too late. "Well now," Grady said, his voice dropping to a murmur. "What is this? You have got a white woman in there and a baby." "She is the clerk," Tawai said, his body shifting to block Grady's view. "A clerk?" Grady chuckled. He turned to one of his men. "You hear that? Boys, the chief has got himself a white clerk. Does she sleep in the stable?" "2." The men laughed. Grady looked back at the window, and a look of calculation crossed his face. He didn't recognize her personally. Eliza had been a nobody, a washerwoman, but he recognized leverage when he saw it. "You know," Grady said slowly, "the sheriff was telling me about a woman who skipped out on a debt and stole milk, said she had a bastard child with no papers, a child who might be better off in a Christian home." Eliza felt her blood turn to ice. "Leave," Tawai said. His hand moved to the knife at his belt. It was a subtle movement, but clear. Grady straightened up. "I am leaving, for now, but you think about that $500. Because if you do not sell, I might have to look into the moral character of this establishment. For the safety of the community. You understand?" He wheeled his horse around and galloped off, his men following in a cloud of dust. Tawai stood on the porch for a long time, watching them go. When he turned to come inside, his face was like granite. "He wants the land," Eliza said, her voice trembling. "He will use me to get it. He will take Noah to hurt you." "He will try," Tawai said. "But he does not know us. He thinks we are weak." "I am weak," Eliza whispered. "I have no money. I have no husband. I have nothing to fight him with." "You have the truth," Tawai said. "And you have this place, as long as you are under my roof. You are under my protection." He went to the back to check the inventory, leaving Eliza alone in the main room. She felt a sudden, overwhelming urge to flee, to run before the trap snapped shut, but where the prairie was endless and empty. She reached into the pocket of her apron. She had been mending her own dress earlier, the one she had worn when she arrived. She had found a crumpled piece of paper deep in the lining, something she had shoved there months ago and forgotten. She pulled it out now, It was a receipt for a wagon ride she had taken 6 months ago, back when she was chasing the phantom of her husband. She smoothed it out on the counter. The ink was faded, but the seal at the bottom was clear. It was a receipt for transport of goods, signed by the man who had authorized the wagon train, authorized by S. Grady. Grady Ranch Logistics. Eliza stared at the paper. Her breath hitched. Her husband had not just ridden off to find work. He had been hired by a cattle outfit. He had mentioned a big job, a man with big dreams in the Panhandle. He had gone to work for Silas Grady, and he had never come back. Eliza looked at the seal, then out the window where the dust of Grady's horses still hung in the air. The man who was threatening to take her son was the same man who held the secret of why her husband had vanished. She folded the paper and shoved it deep into her bodice, next to her heart. She was not just a pawn in a land dispute anymore. She was a witness to something she didn't yet understand. And for the first time, Eliza realized that staying with Tawai was not just about survival. It was about finding out the truth. The paper burned against Eliza's skin where she had tucked it inside her dress. The name Grady, stamped in fading ink, felt less like a receipt and more like a summons. That evening, after the trading post doors were barred and the wind began its nightly assault on the eaves, Eliza placed the crumpled paper on the rough-hewn table between them. "My husband," Eliza said, her voice steady though her hands were not. "He did not just leave to find work. He was recruited. He told me a man with a ranch the size of a county was hiring riders for a long drive north." He mentioned the name Grady. Tawai studied the paper in the lamplight. His face was a mask of concentration, the shadows carving deep hollows beneath his cheekbones. He did not touch the paper, as if it were unclean. "And he never returned," Tawai said. "If Silas Grady is the man who hired him," Eliza continued, the words tumbling out now that the dam had broken, "then Grady knows what happened to him, and if my husband died in his service, or if something worse happened, then Noah is proof of a loose end. Men like Grady do not like loose ends." She looked at the sleeping baby in the corner. "I thought I was just a nuisance to him, a squatter. But if he connects the name Mercer to the man he hired, he might take Noah not just to hurt you, but to bury a secret." Tawai finally looked up. "He is already trying to bury us, Eliza. The reason changes, but the method is the same." "I'm afraid," she admitted. "He has money. He has the sheriff." "What do we have?" "We have the law," Tawai said. "But the law requires witnesses. We need to make your place here solid, not just a woman hiding in a barn, but an employee with a contract." The next morning, Tawai hitched the wagon. He did not take Eliza to the sheriff, but to the small schoolhouse on the edge of the settlement. There, they met Mrs. Hattie Miller, a widow with iron-gray hair and a spine as stiff as a rod. She served as the town's midwife and its only teacher. Mrs. Miller looked from the tall Comanche to the pale young mother, her eyes narrowing behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "I need a witness," Tawai said, placing a sheet of paper on Mrs. Miller's desk. "An employment contract. Mrs. Mercer provides labor in exchange for room, board, and a wage of $2 a month. It is dated from the day she arrived." Mrs. Miller read the document. She looked at Noah, who was cooing in Eliza's arms, and then at the bruises fading on Eliza's wrists, marks from her encounter with the innkeeper weeks ago. "People are saying you are keeping a concubine. Mr. Tawai," Mrs. Miller said bluntly. Eliza flushed crimson, but Tawai did not blink. "People say the earth is flat if they never climb a mountain. I am asking you to witness the truth. She is a clerk and a housekeeper. This paper proves she has a lawful means of support. They cannot arrest her for vagrancy if she is employed." Mrs. Miller uncapped her ink bottle. "I delivered 3 babies this month, and 2 of them died from the cold because their mothers had no wood for the fire. If this child has a warm roof, I do not care whose roof it is." She signed the paper with a flourish. "But be careful. Eliza, ink protects you from the jailhouse, but it does not stop a bullet." The warning proved prophetic. Within a week, the town began to starve the trading post. It started slowly. The supplier from the east, who usually brought flour and coffee every Tuesday, drove his wagon straight past the turnoff to the livery. When Tawai rode out to intercept him, the man refused to stop, shouting over the rattle of wheels that he had exclusive orders to sell only to the town general store. Then, the local farmers stopped coming for tools. A silence fell over the yard, broken only by the wind and the restless stamping of the horses in the corral. Eliza stood in the kitchen, scraping the bottom of the cornmeal sack. There was enough for 2 days, perhaps 3 if they stretched it. The pressure was suffocating. She felt the eyes of the town on her back every time she stepped onto the porch. "It is me," she said one evening, slamming a pot onto the stove. The sound made Noah jump. "They are doing this because I am here, because a white woman is living with you. I am the anchor dragging you down." Tawai was oiling a harness by the fire. He stopped, the rag pausing on the leather. "I should leave," Eliza said, her voice rising in panic. "If I go, Grady stops squeezing you. You can go back to being the useful Indian they tolerate. I am just a shield you are using to prove you are civilized. And it is failing." Tawai stood up. The movement was so sudden that the chair scraped loudly against the floorboards. He crossed the room and stood before her, his presence overwhelming in the small kitchen. "Is that what you think?" he asked. His voice was low, but it vibrated with a suppressed anger she had never heard before. "You think you are a shield, a prop?" "I am a liability," Eliza cried. "I do not need a shield," Tawai said, stepping closer until she had to look up to meet his gaze. "I have lived through smallpox, through war, through the winter where we ate our own moccasins to survive. I do not need a white woman to make me acceptable to men like Silas Grady. I kept you because a child was freezing. I kept you because you work hard. I kept you because—" He stopped. The air between them crackled, charged with everything he did not say. "I need the truth. Eliza," he finished quietly, "and you are the only one in this valley who does not look at me and see a savage or a servant. Do not insult me by saying I am using you." Eliza's breath caught in her throat. She looked at him, really looked at him, stripping away her own guilt. She saw a man who was just as lonely as she was, fighting a battle he could not win with arrows, only with endurance. "I am sorry," she whispered. "We need supplies," Tawai said, stepping back, the wall between them reestablished, though it felt thinner now. "The freight wagon from the south is due tomorrow on the pass. Grady's men will try to stop it before it reaches the junction. We will go meet it." "We?" Eliza asked. "I cannot drive the wagon and watch the ridge at the same time," he said. "You will drive?" The next day was gray and bitter. They took the buckboard wagon out to the southern pass, waiting for the independent freighter who carried grain from the lower counties. When the freighter arrived, he was nervous, his eyes darting to the hills. "Grady's boys are patrolling the road," the freighter said as they loaded the sacks of grain and crates of ammunition into Tawai's wagon. "I cannot go further than this. You are on your own." They were halfway back to the post when the trouble started. The road dipped into a dry wash, the banks rising high on either side. "Faster," Tawai said, his eyes scanning the rim of the canyon. Eliza slapped the reins. "Hiya!" The horses surged forward. Suddenly, a shot rang out, kicking up dirt just inches from the front wheel. 2 riders appeared on the ridge, their faces covered with bandanas. "Stop the wagon," one of them shouted. "Toll road!" "Keep driving," Tawai roared. He grabbed his rifle from the footwell. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She snapped the reins, screaming at the horses. The wagon bounced violently over the rocks. Another shot whined past her ear, splintering the wood of the seat. "Get down!" Tawai yelled. He raised his rifle and fired. One of the riders on the ridge flinched, his horse rearing. "They are trying to spook the team," Tawai shouted. "Hold them steady." "Eliza!" Eliza wrapped the leather reins around her hands. Her terror vanished, replaced by a cold, sharp clarity. This was not about politics or land deeds. This was about the milk in the back of the wagon. This was about Noah. A third rider emerged from the brush ahead, blocking the road. He raised a pistol. Tawai was reloading. He would not be fast enough. Eliza reached for the shotgun Tawai had placed under the seat. She had never fired a weapon at a man. She had only shot at snakes and tin cans, but she did not think so. She pulled the heavy gun up, braced the stock against her shoulder as Tawai had shown her, and aimed not at the rider, but at the ground beneath his horse's hooves. Boom! The shotgun roared, kicking back into her shoulder with bruising force. The dirt exploded in front of the rider's mount. The horse panicked, bucking wildly and throwing the man into the ditch. "Go!" Eliza screamed, dropping the gun and grabbing the reins again. They thundered past the fallen rider, the wagon wheels missing his legs by inches. They tore out of the wash and onto the open plain, leaving the bandits cursing in the dust. When they finally reached the safety of the trading post yard, Eliza was shaking so hard she could not unclench her hands from the reins. Tawai jumped down and ran to her side. He placed his large hands over hers, gently prying her fingers loose. "You did well," he said. His voice was rough with adrenaline. "You did very well." Eliza looked at him, her eyes wide. "I could have killed him." "You saved us," Tawai said. "You protected the house." That night, the dynamic in the trading post shifted. They were no longer just employers and employees. They were comrades. In the quiet evenings that followed, as the winter deepened, they began to trade the only currency they had knowledge, by the light of the oil lamp. Eliza sat with Noah on her lap and a slate board on the table. She taught the alphabet to the few local children who dared to sneak over to the Indian place, and Tawai sat in the shadows, listening. "A is for apple," Eliza said. "B is for bread." And in the afternoons, when the wind bit at their faces, Tawai taught Eliza to read the world. He showed her how the shape of the clouds over the Cap Rock predicted a freeze 3 hours before it arrived. He taught her how to wrap a horse's legs with burlap to prevent frostbite, and how to find water by watching the flight of the mourning doves. "The land speaks," Tawai told her one day as they repaired a fence. "The white man tries to shout over it with his trains and his dynamite, but if you listen, the land tells you where to step." Eliza looked at the vast, brown horizon. It no longer looked empty to her. It looked full. As the first true winter storm approached, Tawai spent 3 evenings in the barn working on a project he kept covered with a canvas. On the 4th night, he brought it inside. It was a cradle. It was not the delicate, spindly furniture of the East. It was made of solid oak, the wood smoothed with sand and oil until it glowed like honey. The rockers were wide and stable, designed not to tip on an uneven floor. Carved into the headboard were symbols. Eliza traced them with her finger. "This is the wind," Tawai explained, pointing to a spiral. "So he will always be free to move. And this," he pointed to a stylized flower. "This is the cotton bloom. Soft, but it survives the drought." Eliza felt a lump form in her throat. She went to her trunk and pulled out the only thing of value she had left, a quilt she had been piecing together from scraps of her old dresses and flannel shirts. She lined the cradle with it. "Wind and cotton," she whispered, placing Noah inside. The baby settled instantly into the deep, safe curve of the wood. "We raise him," Tawai said, his voice soft. Together. It was a promise, unspoken but binding. But the world outside did not care for promises. 2 days later, Sheriff Caldwell rode up to the porch. He did not come alone. He brought Thorne, the innkeeper, and 2 deputies. Eliza stepped out, wiping flour from her hands. Tawai stood beside her, his hand resting near his hip. "Afternoon," Caldwell said. He did not smile. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his coat. "I have a court order here, issued by the magistrate in Amarillo." "What order?" Tawai asked. "Order of confiscation and wardship," Caldwell read, puffing out his chest. "Regarding the minor child known as Noah Mercer, the court has deemed the mother, Eliza Mercer, indigent and morally unfit due to her cohabitation with a known savage. The child is to be remanded to the custody of the state immediately, pending adoption by a suitable Christian family." Eliza screamed. It was a raw, animal sound. She lunged forward, but Tawai caught her arm, holding her back. "Let me see the paper," Tawai said calmly, though his grip on Eliza was like iron. "You cannot read legal script, Chief." Caldwell sneered. "Hand over the boy. I can read it." A sharp voice cut in. "Mrs." Hattie Miller stepped out from the trading post door. She had been there buying thread. She marched past Eliza and snatched the paper from the sheriff's hand. Caldwell looked startled. "Now, Mrs. Miller, this is official business." "Official nonsense." "Mrs." Miller snapped. She adjusted her spectacles. "I know Judge Halloway's signature. He loops his L's. This is a forgery. Sheriff, and look at the seal. It is smeared wax, not the official county stamp." She looked up, her eyes blazing. "You are trying to steal a child with a piece of paper you probably wrote yourself in the back of the saloon." Caldwell's face turned purple. "I have the authority to act in the best interest of—" "You have the authority to get off this porch before I report you to the federal marshal for fraud." "Mrs. Miller said, thrusting the paper back at him. "This document is worthless." Thorne whispered something to the sheriff. Caldwell looked at the deputies, who were shifting uncomfortably. He knew he had been caught. Without the legal cover, taking the baby was kidnapping, and with Mrs. Miller as a witness, he couldn't just bully his way through. "This is not over," Caldwell hissed, pointing a gloved finger at Tawai. "You think you are clever, hiding behind skirts, but papers can be fixed. And winter is coming. Accidents happen." He wheeled his horse and rode off, his posse following. Eliza collapsed against the porch railing, clutching her chest. They will come back. They will come back with a real judge, or they will just come back with guns. Tawai stared after the sheriff. His face had hardened into something stone-like. "They use the law when it suits them," he said. "And when the law fails, they use force. I'm done hiding in the valley." "What are you going to do?" Eliza asked. "I am going to town," Tawai said. "I am going to take my deed, and your contract, and I am going to nail them to the door of the courthouse. I will make every man in Granite Creek see that I own this land, and that you are under my protection. If they want to come for us, they will have to do it in the light." He rode out an hour later. Eliza watched him go, fear gnawing at her stomach. He returned at sunset. He was unhurt, but his clothes were covered in spit, and there was a dark bruise on his cheek where a rock had been thrown. He did not speak of the humiliation. He only walked into the house, looked at Noah sleeping in the oak cradle, and nodded. "It is done," he said. "They know." But Silas Grady was not a man who let the law stand in the way of ambition. The first snow began to fall that night. It was a soft, silent white that covered the scars of the land. Eliza woke up past midnight. The silence was wrong. The crickets had stopped. The wind had died. She crept to the window. Out in the darkness, against the white canvas of the snow, she saw shapes moving. Not one or two, 6, 7, men on horseback, moving slowly, surrounding the barn and the house. They carried torches that were not yet lit. It was not a legal visit. It was a siege. "Tawai," she whispered, shaking him awake where he slept on his pallet by the door. "They are here." Tawai was awake instantly. He rolled to his knees, grabbing the rifle. He looked out the window, his eyes narrowing. "Get the boy," he said, his voice calm and terrible. "Go to the root cellar. Do not come out until I call you." "No," Eliza said. She reached for the shotgun she had used on the wagon. She looked at the cradle, then at the man who had built it. "We raise him together. We fight for him together." Tawai looked at her. He saw the terror in her eyes, but he also saw the steel. He nodded once. "Stay low," he said, "and aim for the horses." Outside, a match was struck. A torch flared to life, illuminating the cruel face of a hired gun. "Burn it out," a voice shouted. The first torch arched through the snowy air, trailing fire like a comet, heading straight for the hayloft of the barn. The torch struck the dry hay in the loft with a sound like a great, inhaling breath. For a second, there was only the orange glow against the winter darkness, and then the fire roared to life, hungry and violent. "Fire!" The shout came from old Pete, the crippled cowboy who had been sleeping in the bunkhouse since Tawai hired him to mend fences. Glass shattered in the main room as a bullet tore through the window, burying itself in the sack of flour on the counter. Eliza threw herself to the floor, curling her body around the cradle where Noah screamed, his wail piercing through the crackle of burning wood. "Stay down!" Tawai's voice was a command that brooked no argument. He was at the window, his rifle shouldered. He fired, the sound deafening in the enclosed space. Outside, a man yelled in pain. The trading post, usually a place of quiet commerce and the smell of curing leather, had become a cage of noise and heat. The fire in the attached barn was spreading fast, the flames licking at the timber walls that connected it to the main house. The smoke began to curl under the door, thick and acrid, tasting of burning tar and pine pitch. Eliza grabbed Noah from the cradle. The heavy oak rocker that Tawai had carved with such care was too heavy to move. She had to leave it. She scrambled on her hands and knees toward the back of the store, dragging her skirts through the dust and the spilled flour. "They are flanking us," it was Hattie Miller's voice. The midwife had stayed after the confrontation with the sheriff, claiming she wanted to check on the baby, but she had sat up all night with a shotgun across her lap. Now, she was at the back door, peering through a crack in the wood. "Two of them coming around the creek side," Red Hawk Tawai shouted in Comanche, then in English. "The roof!" A young Comanche man, hardly older than 18, dropped from the shadows of the rafters where he had been keeping watch. He carried a bow, silent and deadly. He nodded to Tawai and slipped out the side window, moving like a ghost into the smoke-filled yard. Eliza pressed herself behind a stack of crates filled with tinned peaches. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Noah was coughing now, a wet, hacking sound that terrified her more than the bullets. The smoke was thickening, a gray blanket that stung her eyes and burned her throat. "We have to get them out!" Tawai yelled to Pete. "The roof will not hold! If we go out the front, they cut us down!" Pete yelled back, reloading his revolver with shaking hands. "If we stay, we cook." Eliza looked down at her son. His face was red, his eyes streaming tears. The heat was rising, pressing against the walls. She could hear the terrified screams of the horses in the corral, the sound of hooves battering against wood. She realized then that she was going to die. She was going to die in a burning building in the middle of nowhere, with nothing to her name but a stolen moment of safety that had just expired. Eliza. Tawai was there. He had abandoned the window and was crouching beside her. His face was streaked with soot, his eyes fierce and bright in the gloom. "The barn wall is gone," he said, his voice cutting through the roar of the fire. "We have to move to the root cellar, now!" He grabbed her arm, his grip bruising. They moved in a crouch, weaving through the maze of goods. A bullet punched through the wall inches from Eliza's head, showering them with splinters. She cried out, stumbling. Her boot caught on the uneven floorboards near the threshold. She fell hard, her knees striking the wood. The impact jarred her bones. She clutched Noah to her chest to protect him, taking the brunt of the fall on her elbows. She lay there for a second, unable to rise. The heat was unbearable. She looked down at herself. Her dress was torn. Her apron was stained with the flour and the soot. Her bodice was soaked with milk where her fear had caused her to leak, a physical reminder of her motherhood and her helplessness. She reached for her pocket, an instinct to check for the silver dollar, her last piece of security. It was empty. She had spent the dollar 2 days ago on medicine for the horses. She was 26 years old. She was lying in the dirt. She had a baby in her arms. She had no money. She had no husband. And the world was on fire. "Get up," she whispered to herself. But her legs refused to obey. The despair was heavier than the smoke. It pinned her to the floor. Why fight? Why stand up just to be shot? Then strong hands grabbed her shoulders. Tawai did not pull her up. He stopped her from sinking further. He knelt in front of her, ignoring the bullets that buzzed like angry hornets around the building. The firelight from the collapsing barn illuminated his face. He looked at the sobbing baby in her arms. Then he looked at her. He saw the milk stains. He saw the terror. He saw the absolute crushing poverty of her situation. He did not offer her a weapon. He did not offer her a plan. He offered her something far more dangerous. "Eliza," he said. The sound of her name snapped her eyes to his. "Can we raise him together?" The question hung in the air, suspended between the roar of the flames and the crack of the rifles. It was not a proposal of marriage. It was not a proposition of lust. It was a question of survival and will. He was asking if she was willing to build something that would outlast the fire. He was asking if she was willing to bind her life to his, with all the danger and the hatred that entailed, for the sake of the child. Eliza looked at him. He was close, so close she could feel the heat of his body radiating against hers. His forehead was almost touching hers. His hands were firm on her shoulders, grounding her, keeping her from dissolving into the ash. There was a tension between them that was sharper than a knife. It was the intimacy of the foxhole, the raw, stripped-down connection of two people facing the end of the world. She saw the fear in his eyes, but she also saw a fierce, unyielding hope. She looked at Noah. He had stopped crying and was staring up at the flames with wide, dark eyes. If she said no, she could run. She could surrender. Maybe they would spare her. If she said yes, she was declaring war on the whole town. Eliza took a breath of smoke and courage. She looked at the charred remains of the cradle visible through the smoke. She thought of the wind and the cotton blossoms carved into the wood. "If you do not run," Eliza rasped, her voice sounding like grinding stones, "then I will not run." Tawai nodded. A grim, satisfied smile touched his lips. He leaned in, his forehead resting against hers for one brief second. It was a seal, a contract signed in smoke. "Good," he said. He stood up, pulling her with him. "Red Hawk has the flank. Hattie, cover the back door." The dynamic of the fight shifted. They were no longer prey. They were defending a home from outside. A scream echoed not of fear, but of surprise. Red Hawk had found his mark. The firing from the creek side stopped abruptly. "They are breaking," old Pete yelled from the front window. "They did not expect the boy to be waiting for them. One of them is still by the well." Tawai said, "Cover me." He did not wait. He kicked the back door open and sprinted into the yard. Eliza watched from the doorway, her heart in her throat. She saw Tawai dive behind the stone wall of the well. A figure lunged at him, a man in a long duster coat, brandishing a pistol. Tawai was faster. He caught the man's wrist, twisting it until the gun fell into the snow. He swept the man's legs, driving him into the frozen mud. It was over in seconds. Tawai dragged the struggling man by his collar back toward the house, throwing him onto the floorboards of the kitchen just as Hattie slammed the door shut and bolted it. The man groaned, clutching his broken wrist. His mask had fallen off. It was one of Grady's foremen, a man named Skinner. The fire in the barn was raging, but the wind had shifted, pushing the flames away from the main house. The immediate danger of burning alive had passed, leaving only the cold and the prisoner. Tawai stood over Skinner, his chest heaving. He looked terrifying, a demon of smoke and shadow. "Why?" Tawai asked. He did not shout. The quietness of his voice was far worse. "You'll burn a man's livelihood for land for water." Skinner spat blood on the floor. He looked at Eliza, then at the baby. A strange, twisted look crossed his face, half fear, half triumph. "It is not about the water. Indian." Skinner wheezed. "It is the brat." Eliza froze. She stepped forward. The shotgun she had retrieved gripped white-knuckled in her hands. "What did you say?" Skinner laughed, a wet, bubbling sound. "Grady does not care about your few acres. He cares about the will. The old man Silas's father died last month in St. Louis. Left a new will." "What does that have to do with us?" Eliza demanded. "Your husband." Skinner sneered. "Mercer. He was not just a rider. He was the old man's bastard, Silas's half-brother. The old man had a guilty conscience at the end. He wrote it down. If Mercer had a legitimate male heir, the boy gets a third of the Grady holdings. That includes the water rights to the entire valley." The room went silent. The only sound was the crackling of the dying barn fire outside. Eliza felt the world tilt. Noah was not just a fatherless child. He was the legal heir to the empire that was trying to crush them. Grady hired Mercer to kill him. Skinner continued, the pain loosening his tongue. Sent him on a drive he knew would go bad. I thought that was the end of it. Then you show up with a baby boy, and the old man's lawyers are starting to ask questions. He wants to kill my son, Eliza whispered. The horror was absolute. It wasn't just greed, it was fratricide and infanticide erased by fire. He wants the problem gone, Skinner said. Nobody. No heir. No heir. Silas keeps it all. Tawai looked at the man on the floor. He drew his knife. Skinner flinched, scrambling back against the stove. I'm not going to kill you, Tawai said. That would be too easy. He turned to Eliza. Get the ledger. And the ink. Eliza moved. She found the ledger, miraculously untouched by the chaos. She brought the inkwell and a pen. Write, Tawai commanded Skinner. I am not writing anything, Skinner spat. Tawai stepped on the man's broken wrist. He applied pressure slowly. Skinner screamed. Mrs. Miller is a witness, Tawai said coldly. Old Pete is a witness. You will write down exactly what you just said. You will sign it, and tomorrow we will send it to the district judge. Not the sheriff. He will kill me, Skinner whimpered. If you do not write it, Tawai said, leaning down. I will tie you to your horse and send you back to him with a message that you failed. What will he do to you then? Skinner looked at the knife, then at the grim faces surrounding him. He realized he was trapped. The savages were not the ones inside the house. With a trembling hand, Skinner took the pen. Eliza held the inkwell. Her hand was steady now. She watched the black ink flow onto the page, staining the paper just as the soot stained the floor. Every word was a brick in a wall that would protect her son. Jeremiah Skinner, acting on orders from Silas Grady. When he was done, Mrs. Miller signed it. Then Pete, then Eliza. Tawai took the paper. He blew on the ink to dry it. He folded it carefully and placed it in his vest pocket, next to his heart. Tie him up, Tawai told Pete. Put him in the root cellar. He turned to Eliza. The adrenaline was fading, leaving them both shaking. The house was damaged. The barn was a smoking ruin. The winter air was pouring in through the shattered windows. But they were alive. Tawai looked at the scorched cradle in the corner. He walked over to it and ran his hand over the blackened wood. The carving of the wind was charred, but deep. It was still there. We have to rebuild the barn, he said. It was a practical statement, mundane and heavy. Yes, Eliza said. She walked over to him. She did not touch him, but she stood close enough to share his warmth. We will need lumber. And nails, Tawai added. And justice, Eliza said. She looked down at Noah, who had finally fallen asleep against her shoulder. She looked at the man who had stood between her and the fire. The question he had asked, can we raise him together, echoed in the silence. It was no longer a question. It was a vow. We will raise him, Eliza said softly, and we will make sure he knows who fought for him. Tawai looked at her, his dark eyes softening for the first time that night. He reached out and brushed a smudge of ash from her cheek. Then we start tomorrow, he said. Tonight. We keep the fire lit. Outside, the snow continued to fall, covering the blood and the burns, turning the blackened trading post into a white, silent fortress against the dark. The smoke from the fire hung over the valley for 3 days, a gray shroud that smelled of charred pine and resilience. But where the smoke had once signaled destruction, it now signaled industry. The morning after the attack, the rebuilding began. It was not a frantic scramble for shelter, but a methodical reclamation of space. Tawai and old Pete stripped the blackened timbers from the barn's skeleton, their breath steaming in the bitter air. Red Hawk, who had stayed rather than vanishing back into the plains, worked alongside them, hauling fresh lumber from the stockpile Tawai had hidden under tarps before the snow. Eliza Mercer was no longer hiding in the root cellar. She was on the roof of the main house, a hammer in her hand, nailing down shingles to patch the holes left by stray bullets. Her hands were blistered, her skirts heavy with mud, but her eyes were dry and clear. Noah sat nearby in a basket secured to the chimney, wrapped in layers of wool, watching the world with wide, unblinking eyes. The rhythm of the hammers became the heartbeat of the trading post. Thud, thud, thud. It was a sound that carried across the snow, reaching the ears of the townspeople who rode by, ostensibly on business, but truly to gawk at the ruins. They expected to see defeat. Instead, they saw a fortress rising from the ash. "Pass me the nails," Eliza called down. Tawai looked up from the ground, shielding his eyes against the glare of the snow. He tossed a small canvas sack up to her. She caught it with a dexterity she hadn't possessed a month ago. "The wind is turning," Tawai said. "Another storm is coming. Let it come," Eliza replied, driving a nail into the wood with a single, sharp blow. "We will be watertight by noon." They worked until their muscles burned, fueled by a pot of coffee that Hattie Miller kept boiling on the stove. Hattie had not gone back to the schoolhouse. She had declared a winter holiday for her students and set up a makeshift clinic in the trading post's main room to tend to Skinner's broken wrist and the burns on old Pete's arm. But rebuilding the walls was only half the battle. The other half was fought with paper and presents. 2 days after the fire, Eliza rode into Granite Creek. She did not take the back trails. She rode the buckboard wagon right down Main Street, with Hattie Miller beside her and Tawai riding guard on his tall black gelding. The town went quiet as they passed. Men stopped sweeping the boardwalks. Women peered from behind lace curtains. They saw the scorch marks on the wagon's side. They saw the rifle in Tawai's scabbard. And they saw Eliza Mercer, sitting straight-backed, holding her son. They stopped in front of the sheriff's office. Sheriff Caldwell stepped out, his thumbs hooked in his belt, trying to look imposing, but his eyes darted nervously to the crowd gathering around them. "You have got some nerve coming here, Chief," Caldwell grunted. "After the disturbance you caused—" "The disturbance was caused by arsonists," Eliza said. Her voice was not loud, but it carried in the cold air. "Hired by Silas Grady, led by a man named Skinner, who is currently in our custody and has signed a full confession." A murmur rippled through the crowd. "Confession?" Caldwell laughed nervously. "Signed under duress. No doubt a savage's trick." "Signed before witnesses," Hattie Miller cut in, stepping down from the wagon. She held up the document, the black ink stark against the white paper. "Witnessed by myself, a sworn officer of the court's educational district, witnessed by Peter Doolin, and witnessed by Mrs. Mercer." "It is a lie," Caldwell spat. "Is it?" Eliza asked. She looked at the crowd, the shopkeepers, the blacksmith, the wives. Skinner admitted that the attack was not about land. It was about my son, because Silas Grady is afraid of a baby. He is afraid because this child is proof of his father's sins and his own greed. She did not shout. She did not weep. She simply laid the truth out like a bolt of fabric, letting them see the weave of it. "We are not leaving," Eliza said. "We are rebuilding. And if anyone comes to burn us out again, they will answer to the federal marshals in Austin, because this confession is already on the mail stage south." It was a bluff the mail stage had not run in a week due to the snow, but Caldwell didn't know that. His face went pale. He looked at the faces of the townspeople. He saw doubt. He was curious. The absolute power of Silas Grady was showing cracks. Tawai rode forward then. He stopped his horse just feet from the sheriff. "My trading post is open," Tawai said. "We have grain. We have tools. We have fair prices. Any man who comes in peace is welcome. Any man who comes with fire will find that we have water, and we have lead. Choose which one you want." He turned his horse and signaled to Eliza. They rode out of town with the same deliberate pace, leaving the sheriff standing in the mud, his authority evaporating like breath in the cold. Back at the post, the victory felt fragile. They had bought time, but Grady was a wounded animal now, and wounded animals were unpredictable. That night, after the lamps were dimmed, Eliza found Tawai sitting by the new stove, staring into the flames. The stress of the last few days had etched deep lines around his mouth. "I am dangerous to you," Eliza said softly. sitting on the bench opposite him. Tawai looked up. "We have had this conversation." "No," Eliza shook her head. "Before. I thought I was a burden because I was poor. Now, I know I am a target because of Noah. Grady will not stop. I am bringing a war to your doorstep that you did not start. If I leave, if I take Noah and go east, if you go east, you die," Tawai said flatly. "Grady's reach is long. Here, we know the terrain. Here, we have the walls we built." "But you could lose everything," Eliza insisted, tears stinging her eyes. "Your land, your peace. You worked so hard to be good in their eyes, to be safe. I have ruined that." Tawai reached out and took her hand. His palm was rough, calloused from the hammer and the rains, but his touch was grounding. "Eliza," he said, "I did not have peace before you came. I was silent. There is a difference." He squeezed her hand. "You think you dragged me into your war. I was already in it. I was just pretending I wasn't. They hated me for the land before they hated you for the baby. Now, at least, we are fighting for something that breathes." "I am afraid," she whispered. "I am too," Tawai admitted. "But we are afraid together. That makes the fear smaller." The true test of their stance came 3 days later. Not from Grady, but from the sky. A blizzard struck the Panhandle with a ferocity that the elders said hadn't been seen in 20 years. The wind screamed like a banshee, driving snow horizontally, blinding and suffocating. The temperature dropped so low that trees cracked open like gunshots. The trading post, with its reinforced walls and ample firewood, held firm. But the town did not fare as well. On the second day of the storm, a desperate pounding came at the door. Tawai opened it to find a young boy, blue-lipped and shivering, wrapped in a thin blanket. It was the baker's son. "Please," the boy chattered, his teeth clicking together. "The church roof, it caved in. The families, trapped, no heat." The town had gathered in the church for safety, but the structure was old, and the weight of the snow had been too much. Tawai looked at Eliza. It was the town that had spat on her. The town that had turned her away when she was starving. "Get the sled," Eliza said, grabbing her coat. "They would not come for us," Tawai reminded her, though he was already reaching for his boots. "That is why we go," Eliza said, "because we are not them." They hitched the heavy draft horses to the flatbed sled Tawai used for hauling logs. They loaded it with blankets, dried meat, and the medicinal willow bark tea that Tawai kept in jars. The journey to town was a nightmare. The snow was belly-deep on the horses. The wind tried to flay the skin from their faces. Tawai led the team on foot, breaking the trail, while Eliza sat on the sled, shielding the supplies and the medicinal pots. When they reached the church, it was a scene of devastation. One wall had collapsed. The roof was a ruin. 50 people were huddled in the sacristy, freezing, terrified. Sheriff Caldwell was there, useless and huddled in a corner. Tawai kicked the door open. He did not ask for permission. He strode in, looking like a snow-covered giant. "Move to the livery stable," he roared over the wind. "It has a stone foundation. Move!" He began lifting children out of the rubble, carrying 2 at a time to the sled. Eliza set up a triage station near the altar. She handed out blankets. She poured hot tea into shivering hands. She bound wounds with strips of clean cloth she had brought. "Mrs. Mercer." The baker's wife looked at Eliza with shock, her hands trembling as she took a cup of broth. You came? Drink this," Eliza said briskly. "It will warm your blood." For 6 hours, they worked. Tawai drove the sled back and forth, ferrying the wounded to the safety of the stone livery in town. Eliza organized the women, showing them how to huddle for warmth, how to rub frostbitten limbs with snow to bring the circulation back slowly. By dawn, the storm broke. The town was battered, but alive, and the silence that followed was different. It was not the silence of hostility. It was the silence of shame. Silas Grady arrived at noon, his carriage struggling through the drifts. He had ridden out from his ranch to assess his investments. He walked into the livery stable, expecting to take command. He found his townspeople drinking Comanche tea and wearing blankets stamped with the brand of the TW. trading post. What is this? Grady demanded, his face red against his fur collar. Why are you taking charity from these people? Sheriff, get them out of here. Sheriff Caldwell stood up. He looked at Grady. Then he looked at Tawai, who was leaning against a post, exhausted but unbroken. He looked at Eliza, who was rocking a sleeping child that wasn't her own. They saved us, Mr. Grady, Caldwell said quietly. The roof fell. You weren't here. They are criminals, Grady shouted. That woman is a fraud. That man is a savage. I saw who burned the barn. Silas, a voice rasped from the back. It was old Pete. He had ridden in on the sled with the last load. He stood up on his good leg. I saw Skinner, Pete said. And I saw the horses. They were your horses. Silas, Brand and all. You are drunk, Grady sneered. And I saw it too. The baker's wife stood up. Then the blacksmith. Then Mrs. Miller. We all saw the smoke. The blacksmith said, We looked the other way because we were scared of you. But you didn't come when the snow fell. The Indian did. It was not a legal verdict. It was something stronger. It was the verdict of the herd. They had shifted their allegiance to the one who protected the flock. Grady looked around the room. He saw the shift. He saw the end of his unquestioned rule. He turned to Eliza, his eyes cold and hateful. You think you have won, he hissed. Possession is 9/10 of the law. I have lawyers. I have the money. You will never see a penny of that inheritance. I do not want your money, Eliza said, stepping forward. She held Noah close. Keep it. Keep every blood-soaked dollar, but you will sign a waiver. Today, relinquishing all claims to this child, you will admit he is your nephew, and you will set him free. Or what? Grady challenged. Or I will take that confession to the newspapers in St. Louis, Eliza said. Not the courts, the papers. Cattle Baron Burns, baby-to-hide bastard brother. How will your investors like that headline? Mr. Grady. How will the banks in the East feel about lending money to a child killer? Grady froze. He could buy a judge. He could shoot a sheriff. But scandal frightened money more than anything. He looked at the faces around him. He was alone. Fine, Grady spat. Draft the paper. I want nothing to do with the brat. If he is anything like his father, he will die in a ditch anyway. He turned and stormed out, his boots crunching in the snow, a king without a kingdom. The aftermath was quiet. The townspeople began to disperse, returning to their damaged homes. But they stopped to nod at Tawai. They stopped to thank Eliza. The barrier had broken. That evening, back at the trading post, the exhaustion set in. But it was a good exhaustion, the kind that came after a harvest. Eliza sat on the porch, wrapped in a buffalo robe. The sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. Tawai came out and sat beside her. He held a mug of coffee in his hands. They will not forget this, Tawai said. For a few years, at least, until the next wind blows. A few years is enough, Eliza said. It is enough time for Noah to walk, enough time to build the herd. She reached into her pocket. She pulled out the silver dollar, the one with the chipped edge, the one she had thought she lost, but had found in the pocket of her ruined dress when she was changing. She held it out to him. Here, she said. Tawai looked at the coin. You need this. It is your savings. No, Eliza said. She took his hand and pressed the coin into his palm, curling his long fingers over it. It is not savings. It is a buy-in. She looked him in the eye. I am not an employee anymore. Tawai, I am a partner. Half the work, half the risk, half the reward. Tawai looked at the coin, then at her. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his features, making him look younger, lighter. Partner. He tested the word. It sounded good. That is a high price for $1. It is a down payment. Eliza smiled back. I will work off the rest. Then we need an agreement. Tawai said, not a paper one, a real one. A ceremony, Eliza suggested. Not a wedding, not yet, but a naming. Yes, Tawai nodded. A naming. The next morning, the air was crisp and clear. They stood by the creek. where the water flowed black and steady beneath the ice. They did not call the priest. They are called Hattie Miller, Old Pete, and Red Hawk, the family they had chosen. Eliza held Noah. Tawai stood beside her. "In my culture," Tawai said, "a name is a wish. It is what you want the child to become." He touched Noah's forehead with a wet finger. "I name him Puwayet." Tawai said, "It means Iron Mountain, because he survived the fire and the frost, and because he will not be moved." "And I name him Noah," Eliza said softly, "because he will build a vessel to carry life through the flood." They stood there, a white woman and a Comanche man, holding a child who belonged to both worlds and neither. The town was a mile away, recovering from its wounds. The ranch to the north was silent, its master brooding in defeat. But here, by the frozen creek, there was warmth. Eliza looked at Tawai. The tension of the last few weeks, the fear, the survival, the adrenaline had shifted into something deeper, a steady, burning coal of affection. He looked at her, and she saw the question in his eyes again. "Can we raise him together?" She reached out and took his hand, lacing her fingers through his. "We are doing it," she whispered. "We are already doing it." And as the sun climbed higher, melting the snow on the roof of the trading post they had rebuilt board by board, Eliza knew that the hardest part was over. The fire was out. The foundation was set. Now, they just had to live. The wind that swept across the Texas Panhandle in the spring of 1875 was not the biting, scouring gale that had greeted Eliza Mercer 6 months prior. It was a Chinook, warm and heavy with the scent of thawing earth and new sagebrush. It carried the promise of rain, which meant grass, which meant survival. Eliza stood on the porch of the trading post, shielding her eyes against the morning sun. In her hands, she held a hammer. Beside her, balancing on a ladder that he had built from the salvaged timber of the old barn, Tawai held a heavy slab of oak. "A little to the left," Eliza directed, squinting. "Up there," Tawai grunted, his muscles shifting under his flannel shirt as he aligned the wood with the iron brackets. With 3 solid strikes of his own hammer, he drove the spikes home. The sound echoed across the yard, sharp and final. He climbed down and stepped back to stand beside her. They looked up at their work. The sign was new. It was not the rough leather flap that had hung there before. It was a sturdy, planed board, painted with white letters that could be read from the road. Mercer Tawai Trading Post. And beneath the English words, burned deep into the wood with a heated iron, was the Comanche's symbol for the trading place, 2 crossed lines inside a circle, representing the meeting of paths. "It is straight," Tawai observed. "It is bold," Eliza corrected. She wiped her hands on her apron. "It tells them exactly who we are. No hiding. Some will not like the order of the names," Tawai said, a hint of amusement in his dark eyes. "A woman's name before a man's. It is alphabetical," Eliza said with a sniff, though she couldn't suppress the small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "And besides, I handle the books. The books come first." "The horses might disagree," Tawai replied, but there was no argument in his voice. There was only the easy, comfortable rhythm of a partnership that had been forged in fire. The trading post was no longer a ruin. The barn had been rebuilt, larger than before, with a stone foundation that old Pete had laid with surprising skill. The main house had new shutters. The corrals were full of stock, not just wild mustangs, but decent saddle horses that Tawai had broken with his gentle, patient hands. But the biggest change was not in the wood or the stone. It was in the air. Later that morning, a buggy arrived from the direction of town. It was black, dusty, and official. Eliza felt a phantom twinge of the old fear, the instinct to grab Noah and run for the root cellar. But she stood her ground. She was done running. A man in a gray suit stepped down. He was not Sheriff Caldwell. He was a federal marshal from Austin, a man with weary eyes and a mustache that drooped past his chin. "Mrs. Eliza Mercer?" he asked, tipping his hat. "Mr. Tawai, we are here," Tawai said. He did not reach for his knife. He stood with his thumbs hooked in his belt, relaxed but alert. "I have the final disposition on the Grady matter," the marshal said. pulling a leather folio from his coat. "It has been a tangled mess. I will admit, lawyers in St. Louis do not like it when cattle barons in Texas start confessing to arson." "Is he coming back?" Eliza asked. Her voice was steady, but her hand found the railing of the porch. "Silas Grady has liquidated his holdings in the county," the marshal said. "He sold the ranch to a syndicate from Chicago 3 days ago. He has moved his operations to Wyoming. It seems he found the climate in Granite Creek unsuitable." Eliza let out a breath she felt she had been holding for months. Grady had not been dragged away in chains. Men with that much money rarely were. But he had been shamed. He had been exposed by the testimony of a town that refused to be complicit any longer. He had lost his power, and for a man like Grady, that was a fate worse than prison. "And the boy?" Tawai asked. The marshal handed Eliza a document. It was thick, stamped with the seal of the district court. The waiver of parental rights and inheritance, signed by Silas Grady as the executor of his father's estate, the marshal explained. "He relinquishes all claim to the child, Noah Mercer. In exchange for the sealing of the confession regarding the fire, the boy is yours. Mrs. Mercer, free and clear. And," he paused, looking at the second paper in the folio, "this is the residency registration." The marshal continued. "It lists Noah Mercer as a citizen of the county, born of Eliza Mercer, and it lists his place of residence as the Mercer-Tawai Trading Post. It is witnessed by Mrs. Hattie Miller and affirmed by the court." Eliza took the papers. They were just ink and pulp, but they weighed more than gold. They meant that no sheriff could ever drag Noah away in the middle of the night. They meant he existed. He was a person, not a secret. "Thank you, Marshal," Eliza whispered. "Don't thank me, ma'am," the marshal said, climbing back into his buggy. "I just filed the paperwork. You two did the fighting." He looked at the new sign above the porch, then at the Comanche man and the white woman standing side by side. He shook his head slightly, as if he still couldn't quite believe it, then flicked the reins. "Good day to you," as the buggy rolled away, disappearing into the vastness of the prairie. Eliza looked down at the paper. She traced the name Noah Mercer. "He is safe," she said. Tears pricked her eyes, hot and sudden. "He is really safe." Tawai placed a hand on her shoulder. He did not say anything. He didn't have to. The pressure of his hand was a solid, anchoring weight. The departure of Grady broke the dam. Over the next few weeks, the isolation that had defined their lives evaporated. The town of Granite Creek was still a rough place, full of prejudice and grit. But the trading post had become something essential. It was no longer the Indian place. It was the place where you could get a fair price for a hide. It was the place where the horses were sound. It was the place that had saved them from the blizzard. One Tuesday afternoon, the yard was busy. 3 wagons were loaded with supplies. A group of cowboys from the new syndicate ranch were inspecting a roan mare in the corral. On the porch, Eliza sat on a rocking chair. She was not resting. Around her sat 4 children, the baker's son, the blacksmith's daughter, and 2 others from the homesteads further out. "B," Eliza said, holding up a slate. "B is for—" "Barn," the blacksmith's daughter shouted. "Good," Eliza smiled. "And B is for a book, and B is for bread." She looked up from the lesson. Across the yard, Tawai was negotiating with a freighter. The man was arguing about the price of oats. Tawai listened, his face impassive, then spoke a few words. The freighter laughed, shook his head, and extended his hand. They shook. It was a small thing, a handshake. But 6 months ago, that freighter would have spit on the ground rather than touch a Comanche. Eliza watched Tawai move through the crowd. He walked differently now. He no longer hugged the shadows. He walked down the center of his own land, claiming the space not with a weapon, but with his competence. He was the bridge. He was the one who knew the language of the wind and the language of the contract. And she was the anchor. She was the one who turned the ledger from a list of debts into a record of community. The lesson ended, and the children scattered. running toward the jar of peppermint sticks Eliza kept on the counter. Hattie Miller, who had come by to check on old Pete's leg, sat down on the bench beside Eliza. "You have a full schoolhouse," Hattie observed, wiping her spectacles. "Just a few hours a week," Eliza said, "until the church roof is fixed and the school opens again. They learn better here," Hattie said bluntly. "You don't hit their knuckles with a ruler." She looked at Eliza. "You have done a remarkable thing. Eliza, you took a scandal and turned it into a stronghold." "I didn't do it alone," Eliza said, looking toward the corral where Tawai was now lifting Noah up to sit on the back of a gentle old pony. The baby squealed with delight, his small hands clutching the mane. "No," Hattie agreed. "You didn't. And that is what irritates the gossips the most. They wanted a tragedy. You gave them a family." That evening, the wind died down, leaving the air still and cool. The customers had gone. Old Pete had retired to the bunkhouse. Red Hawk had ridden out to check the herd on the ridge. It was just the three of them. Eliza sat on the steps of the porch, tired in her bones but light in her spirit. Tawai came out of the house, carrying 2 tin cups of coffee. He handed one to her and sat down, stretching his long legs out into the dust. Noah was nearby, crawling on a buffalo rug spread on the wooden planks. He was pulling himself up on the railing, babbling a stream of sounds that were halfway between English and the guttural, rhythmic sounds of Comanche. "He is talking," Tawai said, watching the boy. "He is making noise." Eliza laughed. "He is arguing with the railing. He has your chin," Tawai noted. "Stubborn. And he has your patience," Eliza countered. "Or at least, I hope he learns it. He will need it." They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The sky turned a bruised purple, then a deep, velvety indigo. The first stars appeared, sharp and bright. "The roof held in the rain yesterday." Tawai said, "It did." Eliza nodded. "The new shingles are good. We need to fence the north pasture next month," he continued, "if we want to expand the herd." "The ledger says we can afford the wire," Eliza said, "if we are careful with the flower order." It was not a romantic talk. It was the talk of survival. It was the talk of work. But to Eliza, it was the most beautiful language she had ever heard. It was the sound of a future being built. 1 plank, 1 fence post, $1 at a time. "Eliza," Tawai said. She turned to him. He was looking at her, the coffee cup forgotten in his hands. "I have no gold to give you," he said. "I have this land, but it is hard land. I have these hands, but they are rough. I cannot promise you that the town will ever fully accept us. I cannot promise that it will be easy. I did not come here looking for easy." "Tawai," Eliza said softly. "I came here looking for a wage, and then I was looking for safety." "And now?" he asked. Eliza looked at the trading post behind them. She looked at the sign they had hung together. She looked at the man who had stood between her and the fire, who had sold his pride to buy her legality, who had learned to love a child that was not his own. "Now," Eliza said, "I am looking for home." She reached out and took the cup from his hands, setting it on the floorboards. She took his hands in hers. "I don't want a soft life. Tawai, I want a life that stands up when the wind blows. I want to mend the roof with you. I want to count the cattle with you. I want to watch him grow up knowing that his father is the man who stayed, not the man who left." Tawai stared at her, his defenses finally crumbling completely. The stoicism of the warrior melted into the vulnerability of the man. "Then stay," he whispered. "Stay until the grass stops growing." He leaned in. It was not the desperate, adrenaline-fueled closeness of the night of the fire. It was slow. It was deliberate. He kissed her. His lips were warm and tasted of coffee and the wild sage. It was a kiss of profound gratitude and quiet passion. It was a claim, not of ownership, but of belonging. Eliza closed her eyes, leaning into him, feeling the strength of his shoulder against hers. For the first time in her life, she felt completely untethered from her past and completely anchored in her present. "Mama die!" The shout was loud and demanding. They broke apart, laughing. Noah was standing holding the railing, bouncing on his heels, furious that he was being ignored. He has excellent timing, Tawai chuckled, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. He knows he is the boss, Eliza said, standing up and scooping the boy into her arms. Noah grabbed a fistful of her hair and yanked, then reached out for Tawai. Tawai stood and took the boy. He held him high in the air, silhouetted against the starlight. Ha, Pawiyet, Tawai said softly. Urakima. Yes, Iron Mountain. Come here. What did you tell him? Eliza asked, leaning her head against Tawai's arm. I told him it is time to sleep, Tawai said, because tomorrow we have fences to build. They walked inside together. The door closed against the night, shutting out the vast, empty prairie. Inside, the fire in the stove was banking down to coals, glowing with a steady, enduring heat. In the corner, near the window, stood the new cradle. It was made of hickory this time, stronger than the oak. Eliza placed Noah in the cradle. She tucked the quilt around him, the quilt she had stitched, now mended where the fire had singed it. She listened to the wind outside. It whistled around the eaves, a sound that used to terrify her. Now, it just sounded like the world was breathing. She watched Tawai move around the room, checking the locks, turning down the lamp. He caught her watching him and smiled, a true, open smile that reached his eyes. We are home, Eliza whispered to the darkness. She wasn't left with a baby and no money. She was rich in the only currency that mattered. She had a partner, she had a purpose, and she had a place where the fire would never go out. Thank you so much for listening to the story of Eliza and Tawai. It has been a long journey from the cold streets of Granite Creek to this warm spring night, and I hope their story touched your heart as much as it did mine writing it. I would love to hear from you. Where are you listening to this story from? Are you in a busy city? Or out in the quiet country like our characters? Please leave a comment below, and let's share our thoughts. If you enjoyed this tale of the Wild West, please consider subscribing to my channel, Wild West Tales. Don't forget to hit the like button and press the hype button to help this story reach more listeners. Your support keeps the campfire burning and the stories coming. Thank you, and see you on the next trail.